Namaste and welcome everyone. Today's topic is communication barriers. Communication is one of our basic needs. We require communicating with many people for personal or professional purpose. But while communicating, we may face many hurdles or problems. Sometimes the message is not passed properly or it gets lost in the process. There are chances of misunderstanding also between the sender and the receiver. Sometimes language used in the communication is not understood properly. This results into communication breakdown or communication failure. There are many reasons behind the problems in the communication process. So let's see the communication barriers in detail. But before that, we'll see the definition of the barrier to communication. What is a communication barrier? Any obstacle or problem in the process of communication which hinders or obstructs the process of communication is called communication barrier. What is a communication barrier? Any obstacle or any problem in the process of communication which hinders or which obstructs the process of communication is called communication barrier. Barriers are part of process of communication. Whenever we are communicating, we encode and decode, we use various channels for passing messages. At any level or at any moment or stage, there can be problems in communication process. Sometimes the sender does not use proper language that the receiver understands, or receiver may not be able to decode properly. There can be a lot of noise in the surrounding which can disturb the communication process. It rarely happens that barriers do not arise in the communication process. Many a times, barriers arise in the minds of the sender and the receiver. The intended messages are not sent to the receivers. So there are many types of communication barriers. So these barriers are classified into the following types. Communication barriers are classified into the following types, and the first is physical or environmental barriers. The barriers in the surrounding or in the environment are the physical barriers. Second is language or semantic barriers. Barriers arising due to different language or differences in language can create problems in communication. Semantic barriers mean the problems arising because of the different meanings of the words. So the first barrier is physical barrier, second is language or semantic barrier. Third type of barrier is psychological barrier. Barriers or problem arising due to stress or psychological reasons are psychological barriers. And generally it is difficult to accept and overcome these barriers, it has been seen. Fourth type of barrier is socio-cultural barriers. Due to differences in social status or culture, many times we face differences in communication, and these are called socio-cultural barriers. So the four types of barriers are: first, physical or environmental barrier; second, language or semantic barrier; third, psychological barrier; and fourth, socio-cultural barrier. Now let's see in detail these barriers. The first is physical barriers. Many barriers arise in the surroundings or our environment, and these barriers create problems or confusion in communication. And what are these barriers? First, noise. Traffic noise or noise of machines in factories create disturbances in communication, or any other kind of noise from the environment can disturb communication process. So the first kind of physical barrier is noise arising from the surroundings. Second is time and distance. Time zones around the world are not same. Due to differences in timings between countries, we have to adjust with the time differences, because time zones around the world are not same. Next, defects in communication system. Many times the instruments or machines used in communication, such as telephones or computer, can develop problems. Sometimes the network of internet can fail, or there can be problem with the microphone used. And sometimes due to excess rains or natural calamity, it becomes difficult to use these instruments properly. The failure of electric power also results into communication loss, or messages are not sent properly. Next, wrong selection of medium. Selecting correct medium is necessary. Temperature and humidity, excess temperature or heat or cold temperature creates difficulties in communication. Many a times, stammering, bad hearing, failure of communication channels, and bad handwriting can also create misunderstanding in grasping the message. So, what are the physical barriers? Barriers arising from the surroundings or from the environment are called physical barriers. Examples are noise, traffic noise, noise of machines, or any other kind of noise from the environment can disturb the communication process. Time and distance. Time zones around the world are not the same. So there are differences in timings between countries, so we have to adjust accordingly. Next, defects in communication system. Many times the instruments or machines used in communication, such as telephones or computers, can develop problems. The network of internet can fail, or there can be a problem with the microphone used. So these are all physical barriers. Or sometimes due to excess rains or natural calamity, it becomes difficult to use these instruments properly. The failure of electric power also results into communication loss. Wrong selection of medium. Temperature and humidity, excess temperature, cold temperature may create difficulties in communication. And sometimes stammering, bad hearing, failure of communication channels, and bad handwriting also create misunderstanding in grasping the message properly. So these were some physical barriers. Now coming to the next type of barrier, which is language barriers. Barriers arising due to differences in language. Words meaning or pronunciation can create confusion among the people. Semantic means the meaning of the words. Following are some of the examples of language barrier. Let's see what are language barriers. Different languages or lack of common language can create obstacles in communication. Lack of common language can create obstacles in communication. A person who does not understand the native language or any foreign language finds difficulty in communicating. Another type of language barrier can be multiple meaning of words. Words can have different meanings. Word power is a gift to human beings, but at the same time, multiple meanings, different connotations of words can create problems in communication. Words with similar pronunciation but different meanings also create problems in communication. Jargon, that is technical words used by professionals such as engineers, doctors, or any other professionals. So many times these technical words or jargon may create a communication problem. Now coming to the next type of barrier, which is psychological barrier. Psyche means mind. Psychological barriers arise in the minds. Human mind is a very complex thing to understand. We face many times some conflicts due to some situations or surrounding events. So these barriers are bound to arise. But the real problem is that people do not accept that these barriers exist in their minds. Due to status and ego problems, many times psychological barriers are created. These are difficult to overcome because people do not accept that they are facing such barriers. Now let's see some psychological barriers. Ego. I attitude can create barrier in mind. Ego barriers create conflict in human relations. Second, prejudice. Bias about people on the basis of community, caste, religion and region or on personal basis is very negative for communication. Prejudice can hamper the communication. Third, emotions and feelings. Emotional disturbances of the sender or receiver can distort the communication process. Fourth, halo effect. Like or dislike about a person can create halo effect, and this can affect communication process. Fifth point, self-image. Positive or negative image about self is the way of looking at the world. Negative self-image can destroy or hamper communication. Sixth point, filtering messages. Messages are filtered intentionally sometimes to defend or protect themselves during some problems. Many times messages are changed or filtered by the people. Seventh, closed mind. Most of the times our minds are closed or not ready to learn new things. With old age or change in attitude, this problem is observed. This is also a barrier in communication. Next point, status. Status creates barriers among the employees. Higher or lower status creates obstacles in thinking or in mixing with people. People remain distant while communicating due to status barriers. Ninth, the next point, perceptions. The way we look at the world or attitude determines our communication strategy. Wrong or negative perception can create difficulty in communication. Next, poor retention. Ability to retain the message or remember it is important. But if it is poor, then communication becomes difficult. So, ability to retain the message or remember it is also important. Next point, interest and attitudes. Interest and attitudes of people determine communication strategy. Lack of interest or wrong attitude can lead to improper communication. Next point, daydreaming. People have habits of thinking about something else when some lecture is going on or some talk is going on. So this daydreaming obstructs the communication and messages are not reached properly. Coming to the next type of barrier, which is socio-cultural barriers. Culture is a way of life comprising some values or principles. Cultural differences between people can create barriers. Differences in the culture can create misunderstanding in communication. Due to globalization and liberalized policies in business, people around the world are traveling and working in multinational corporations or companies. This led to interaction of people, but due to differences in language, practices, dressing styles, food habits, many times people get confused and are not able to understand each other properly. And this leads to communication failure sometimes. So let's see some examples of socio-cultural barriers. The concept of punctuality differs in cultures, etiquettes and mannerisms. In every society or culture, different types of mannerisms are observed. This includes rule of behaviors or how to follow certain code of conduct, different forms of address and salutations, or different methods of dressing are observed. This can be confusing sometimes. Food preparation methods or serving methods are not the same. There are certain expected norms of eating food and meeting. These are called dining etiquettes. So they may differ. And body language or non-verbal behavior around the world is not the same. So there can be misunderstandings because of this. Proximity or the concept of space differs from culture to culture. So these are the 4 types of communication barriers: physical or environmental barriers, second, language or semantic barriers, third, psychological barriers, and fourth, sociocultural barriers.